Being chased is terrifying. Whether it's paranormal or a creeper in a van, sometimes a feeling of terror by something unseen is more comforting than staring into the face of a monster. All of these stories left me thinking, what the actual fuck? Enjoy. When I was 6, 28 years ago, my mom and dad took me and my younger sister to a baseball game, leaving my grandmother to babysit my youngest sister. When we got back, my grandmother told my folks that 2 guys had come by the house with photography equipment and asked whether a young girl with red curly hair lived there, and that they had spotted her and that she would be a great child model for some advertising work they were doing. When my grandmother said she wasn't home, they said they would come back another time. My grandmother and mother didn't think much about it, but my dad said, something's not right here, and called the police. 15 minutes later, several FBI agents showed up and began conducting interviews with my grandmother and my parents, while I ran around and showed the agents my Matchbox police helicopter. Turns out, we had been targeted by a child theft ring. The photographers would take a bunch of photos and wait until the toddler threw a tantrum, and the photographers would then ask the mother to go grab a toy to keep the child entertained. While the mother was out of the room, they would grab the child and bolt, leaving everything else behind. The FBI told my folks that my sister had already been sold and would have been out of the country within 24 hours if they got her. We were advised to change preschools and other aspects of our daily routine. It still gives me chills to think about what could have happened to her. Needless to say, my mother became very overprotective. It was a few years before she even trusted us with a babysitter. A guy made a Craigslist posting saying he was a talent scout and ran an agency. He got the interest of a father, grandfather, and his granddaughter. This guy's specialty was casting families, preferably children, under the guise that he was looking to produce a film and needed actors. Not too long ago, the grandfather and his granddaughter went to meet this guy up at the house. They drove by the house 2 hours early to check it out. There was a for sale sign outside, and it appeared to be vacant. The family drove by later at the agreed time of meeting in the morning, and were greeted at the door by a man in a suit. He tried to convince the little girl to come inside many times. The grandfather got a bad feeling and left. Turns out, in an unrelated sting, the police caught the same guy for child porn charges. He had 10 counts of child porn, and his home was raided. The father, grandfather, around the same time reported this incident to the police. When the police found this guy, he had a bag with him. In it was a knife, zip ties, sex toys, and he even had plastic sheeting. His plan was to kill the grandfather, rape and murder the child. And his plan was to get all of this on film. The camera was set up and ready to go. Luckily, the father and grandfather had a gut feeling something was off and reported the incident. This guy happened to be a kid I grew up with knowing for about 15 years. He was even my brother's roommate for a while. He was always very creepy and I couldn't ever pinpoint exactly why. I felt my stomach drop reading the news. This guy had been inside my home, went to parties I had, and I've had multiple conversations with him. Luckily, he won't be getting out of jail anytime soon. Okay, so I'm at Walmart, standing in front of the French bread. Notice this strange guy standing there, staring at the food. He's about 40, jean shorts, a little overweight, handlebar mustache, tight shirt, and flip-flops. I pick up one loaf of bread, and he turns to me with a strange smile. Walk away from creepyfuck.jpg. After a while, 30 minutes or so, I change my mind and go back to the bread aisle. and that dude is still standing there in the same spot, just staring. So I put the bread back. He immediately grabs it, the one I just put down, storms to the cash register, pays, and leaves. It's the only thing he bought. What the hell? Side note, this one wasn't scary, but it still had me thinking, what the fuck? When my mom was young, her and her mother lived in a trailer in the backyard of a family member's house. My mom was about 12 at the time that the man in the neighboring house started to stare at her from time to time. She got a creepy vibe from him, but figured it was just a harmless, lonely guy. One night when my mom was home alone, she heard something on the roof of their trailer. Then she heard what sounded like footsteps slowly walking along the metal rooftop. Given that they were dirt poor at the time, they did not have a phone, so she eventually ran out of the trailer and into the house without looking on the roof. When her uncle went outside to investigate, nothing was on the roof. A few weeks went by with no incidents, and my mom figured she must have been overly scared of nothing. More fucked up stuff would randomly happen, but only when she was home alone, and it was always spaced out by a week or two. If I remember correctly, this occurred over maybe a couple of months before it stopped completely. Months went by without any weird instances at all, until one night, my mother wakes up to the trailer being unbelievably hot. She could feel the heater on full blast. She got out of bed and was about to go to the controller for the trailer's heat, but she was overcome with a bad feeling and decided to just go into the house. The uncle went out to the trailer and noticed that the lock on the door was broken or messed with. He looked inside but didn't see anything. His wife made him call the police, and when they came, they searched the trailer and found one of the kitchen knives behind a chair next to the heating controller. They suspected that the neighbor had went into the trailer, turned the heat up, and crouched behind the chair waiting for my mom to come by, and then who knows what. It's been a long time since I heard this story, but from what I can remember, the cops questioned the neighbor, but really couldn't do anything about it. Luckily, my mother and grandmother were able to move out of that town right after that. My mother told me about 5 or something years later, she was visiting other family who lived in a nearby town, and she saw the very same neighbor at the grocery store and bolted out of there before he saw her. A few months ago, while I was still in school, I rented an old house with 2 of my friends. I lived in the basement, and they each had a room upstairs. Several strange things happened to me while I was living in that basement. The first was that I had just gotten a dog. He was about 4 months old at the time. Now and then, right when I turned the TV off to go to sleep, my dog would start whining and growling at the corner of my room. He would usually not get on my bed because he wasn't allowed, but during these times, he would jump up on my bed and get as close to me as he could, all without his eyes never leaving that corner. This happened about 5 times over the course of 4 months. Toward the end of the school year, when I was about to move out, the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life occurred. Under our stairs was a little door that led to a small space that had a dirt floor. There was also a really weird old wooden piece of what looked like a map nailed to the inside of the door, so it's a pretty spooky place. Up until that day before this incident, we had kept a small chair in front of the store that I laid my coats and things on. But we had had some friends over that night before, so we had brought the chair upstairs. It was dark, probably 8 p.m., and I had just been upstairs in the kitchen. I had just gotten off the stairs and was about to open the door to my room, when the door to the little closet under my stairs opened so slowly, with the loudest creak I've ever heard in my life. I stood rooted to the spot, frozen in fear, staring at the closet, waiting for whatever was about to come out of it. I literally stood there for about 5 minutes, absolutely terrified. Eventually, I opened the door to my room and locked it as fast as I could. I wasn't sure either of my roommates were home, so I called one of them and they were. But I spent the rest of that night upstairs with her, too scared to go back downstairs. I should mention that I'm a 21-year-old man who does not scare easily. Now I know many of you will probably say it was the wind, or the fact that I had just come down the stairs, or something just as my roommates did. But I've had those things happen to me before and been kind of creeped out, but this was different. The second I heard that closet open and looked over to see it opening so slowly, I felt sheer terror. It honestly felt like there was something or someone else in the room with me that wanted me to see that door open. When I was 7, my mom gave birth to my little sister. Me and my dad went to visit her in the hospital and check out my new family member. As 7-year-olds often do, I got bored. So my parents sent me to the kiosk right outside the main building to get an ice cream. As I was walking toward the kiosk, I cut over the lawn as it was a shorter walk. Suddenly, I feel and hear a really heavy thud right behind me. I turn around to see the warped, mangled body of a man in a hospital gown maybe 40 to 50 centimeters from where I was just standing. The man had jumped off of the hospital roof after receiving the news that he had terminal cancer. My mom and a lot of the others in the birth ward even saw the guy flying past the windows. The guy basically just fell short of killing me along with himself. It was highly suggested by staff that I receive emergency therapy, but I insisted on getting my ice cream and going home. To this day, I can still recall the thud of the body hitting the ground and his body lying next to me, clear as day. I still tell this story sometimes, mostly when I'm drunk or high. I don't know why it comes up, but I guess the shit stuck with me. I had to take care of my mentally handicapped cousin a few years back. She could get around well enough, but due to severe arthritis in her knees and ankles, she had to be watched, helped into the bath, things like that. I would go into a room in the morning, help her to her walker so she could use the bathroom and make her breakfast. One morning, I heard the water running in the bathroom when I went to check on her. I had to pass her room on the way to the bathroom. When I did, I saw that she was in her rocking chair in the corner, her blanket over her head, and she was rocking back and forth. "Don't leave the water on, you're gonna flood the place." I went into the bathroom to shut the faucet off, and my cousin was there, washing her face. I immediately ran back to the room, but it was just her blanket crumpled up in the rocking chair. My cousin wanted to know why I undid her bed. I didn't stay too long after that. My friend told me that one night when she was little, she was playing with her brother and sister. Her little brother looked out the window and said, "Who is that man?" They all went to the window to see what he was talking about. She said there was a white figure sitting on top of the telephone pole. Looked like a man. He was just staring at them with a huge, creepy smile. Then he just stood up and jumped off the pole and simply vanished before they saw him hit the ground. She said it scared them so much that her sister still won't even talk about it. I delivered newspapers in a fairly rural area the summer after I graduated high school. One night it's pouring rain, and I'm driving down this dirt road that is a dead end to a farmer's house. I've been down this road a few dozen times and know the routine. Drop the paper off in the box at the end of the drive, turn around, back up, and off to my next stop. This time, as I'm getting out of my car to place a newspaper in the holder, I see a man in the ditch wearing a drenched white shirt, running at me as fast as he can. He got within 20 feet of me. I could see what my mind pictured as a hatchet or an axe. I had never ran so hard in my life. It must have been about 5 or 10 minutes later that I attempted to call 911. No signal using my Motorola flip phone in the middle of nowhere in the year 2000. I had to stop at a farmer's house to call the police at 2 a.m. Turns out, the guy killed himself within an hour of his run-in with me in that wooded ditch. I live in a heavily wooded area just outside my hometown. My backyard goes directly into the woods since my family owns the land I live on. As a child, the woods around my house were always a fun place to explore. My parents built a cabin, and I even built a little fort for myself further down, as a little place to go escape from the world. It was great. When I was about 10 and bored, I decided to go outside and walk around the woods from my backyard. Maybe hit up the fort or climb some trees. Alone, I walked in the woods and made my first stop at the cabin. So once I was there, I just kind of sat in a rocking chair and started reading some books I left on the floor. Passed out while reading and had no idea how long I was out. But when I woke up, I saw that the sun was starting to set. Naturally, I was pretty scared of the idea of being in the woods at night, so I got up and decided to leave. As the sun set more and the woods got darker, I started walking faster and faster to get home till I saw my house in the distance. All of a sudden, while I'm walking and not looking where I'm going, I tripped and fell hard on the ground. I got up and looked for where I tripped and couldn't see a stump or branch that could have made me fall. The next part is what still gives me chills to the bone every time I think about it. After scanning and finding nothing, I turned around to leave, and from behind me I heard someone whisper, "Don't leave," right into my ear. I gasped and got the fuck out of there. I ran so fast to my house that on the last stretch back I tripped and rolled down a dirt hill and scrambled to get myself up. I ran till I was in my backyard and looked back to the woods, and all I could see was a dark silhouette of a man. No face, just blackness. Walk out until it was on the very edge of the tree line and just stood there watching me. In the midst of my fear, I just could not move at all and kept staring at it. I really had no idea who it was. After a while of watching it stand there, my senses came back, and I ran into my house and didn't leave my parents' side for the rest of the day. The creepiest part is that I didn't see any clothes on them or anything. It was just a dark figure standing in the woods looking at me. No face or eyes. My mother just recently told me the story of her friend's creepy dad. One night when she was younger, she stayed over at her friend's house. The friend's creepy dad offered them fresh venison for dinner. Mom never had venison, but of course ate it, as not to be rude. Friend later tells Mom that her dad is not a hunter. Years later, we learned that creepy dad had murdered and cannibalized several women over the course of his life. Mom is pretty sure she ate human meat. It was the 1980s. Sacramento neighborhood late at night, visiting a friend when I was maybe 9 or 10. The three of us walk out to go play at the elementary school several blocks away at around 10 p.m. We were playing frisbee in the street in front of the school, and our frisbee lands in the street as a white van pulls up and stops, as if to allow us to get our frisbee. I walked toward the van and grabbed the frisbee, then moved to the side to allow the van to pass. As the van passed, the sliding door opened, and a guy dressed in black came flying out and tried to grab me. He had a harness on, and the van had been rigged with a telescoping mechanism that allowed him to come out around 5 feet while hanging from this harness. It was operated by another person inside, also dressed in black. So there were at least 3 people involved in this attempt. I barely dodged his attempt to grab me. All three of us ran toward the school and hopped the fence, ran along the fence through the bushes, then hopped a second fence even taller that allowed us to be inside the school. We were scared as hell, and we could hear the van driving around and assumed they were in hot pursuit. We found a way to get onto the roof of the school from inside, thank God, and proceeded to observe the van driving around the school for at least 30 minutes in an obvious attempt to find us. This scared us even more, because one would think the kidnappers would flee, but I suppose they thought we could identify them. This was before cell phones. We stayed up there until around 45 minutes after we last saw them. It appeared that some of them were searching for us on foot also, which added to the fear. We eventually escaped and went back to my friend's house, and never told anyone in our family out of fear of being punished. About 2 years ago, I was in my room reading a book when I hear it, soft as ever, 2 little girls giggling. Not just any giggle. It was the kind of giggling you hear in horror movies. I immediately put down my book and listened. After about a minute of holding my breath, I decided it must have come from outside. Then that night, just as I'm about to drift off to sleep, I hear it again. 2 little girls giggling. Now it was 2 a.m., and I was pretty damn sure there weren't 2 little girls outside my window at that time of night, so I began to freak out. I sat up in bed and waited for what felt like forever, just listening. Then I hear it again. I jumped out of my bed and went and spent the rest of the night in the guest room. By the next morning, I was convinced my room was haunted. For the next week, I avoided my room and spent my nights in the guest room unbeknownst to my family. I was afraid to tell anyone for fear I was going crazy or they wouldn't believe me. But every time I spent more than an hour in my room, I would hear those 2 little girls giggle. By the end of the week, I was a mess. I could barely sleep and was terrified of my room. Then one morning, my brother walks up to me and says, "Are you deaf or something?" Obviously, I was confused, and after further questioning, he tells me about this small device he had placed in my room. Apparently, it's some sort of prank device that's easily hidden and can make a variety of different noises. My brother, however, chose the creepy as fuck little girls giggling. He wondered why I hadn't heard it or had said anything about it all week and just wanted to punch him in the face. So my room wasn't haunted after all. Sometimes your brother is just an asshole. This last one is my own personal experience I had with The Exorcist. Actually, it was The Exorcist 2. I had seen many horror movies by then, but hadn't seen this one, and actually to this day, I still haven't seen the entire thing. Each time I've tried, I have been interrupted. Odd, sure. Paranormal, maybe not. Anyway, I was 8, home alone with my brother who was 5. It was pretty normal for us to be left alone, but this isn't about that. I had seen and been around more things than most kids should be by then, but as I have read on this channel, I'm not alone in that. Being alone wasn't scary to me, it was comforting. No surprises, no scary grown-ups. So there I am watching this movie. My little brother was asleep. And I'm in the part of the movie when Linda Blair is hooked up to some machinery and they're trying to channel her abilities or something like that. At least that's what I think was going on. If I recall, the scene had something to do with the door closing. And for some reason, right as she made the door shut on the TV, my parents came home, turned off the movie, and sent me to bed. I remember begging my mom not to shut the door. So I'm lying there, heart racing, staring at the door, repeatedly saying in my head, "Don't close, don't close, don't close," repeatedly on and on for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. That's when the door slammed shut and I screamed bloody murder. My mother came running in and I told her. She blamed the movie and the wind and propped something in front of the door. And all I can remember is staring at the door until I must have passed out. Coincidence? Probably, maybe. But it sure as hell didn't seem that way. It still doesn't. I've had many more weird things happen to me, but for some reason this incident stands out like no other. Many of you requested this because of yesterday's video, so I thought I would share it with you. So whether it's paranormal or a predator waiting to pounce, the feeling of terror is the same. Shadows waiting in the dark for just the right moment while you scramble to make the right choice. Or occasionally, like one of the stories, you just happen to live with an asshole. See you next time.